No, we're going to be all over Micah. We are in the book of Micah tonight. We're going to finish it up. Second part of Micah. And then next week is Nahum. And then for a while, we're just going to have one night on each guy. We'll kind of go through them really quick. A lot of them are super short. And so you'll remember them better, I guess, because they'll be easier. So we are in Micah, or in Hebrew, Micah, the prophet Micah. If you have your little card, you kind of see that, right? So it's right after Amos. And Micah is a prophet before the Assyrian army comes into Israel, during that and after that. So he kind of worked from 740 to about 700, right? So he was prophesying about 20 years before the Syrian army, during the Syrian army, and about 20 years after it. And so remember, during this time would have been right after Amos, even though a lot of this has to do with Israel, the northern kingdom, the 10 northern kingdoms, but he never left Judah, where he's from, right? Remember, he's just from a small town, Morsheth, just 15 miles or so. It would be west of Jerusalem. And so he is speaking about Israel, but also speaking to Judah, because the whole time he is in Judah speaking about Judah. So he's speaking to both Israel and Judah. And that's why on your card it says Israel and Judah. And why is we talked about last week, it's kind of in your mind, we have a courtroom scene going on here. God is the judge, and he's calling Israel kind of to be guilty of sin. And there's only one witness on the stand, and that's God himself. So he is the witness and he is the judge. And if you remember last week, we broke it down, or I broke it down into two sections. And last week we went over the accusations, kind of all the wrong that they've been doing, right? So God has called them to court. He summons them in chapter 1. And then we looked at all the things they've done wrong, right? Much like kind of the same sins as Amos and Hosea. A lot of oppression going on, a lot of the leaders taking advantage of the poor, the widow, the orphan, which is a good time for many of us who are reading through the Old Testament. How much time does God give in the law to the poor, to the widow, to the orphan? A whole lot, right? I mean, he's always about it. And so here kind of lines up nicely. As we're reading, God is talking about in Deuteronomy that he loves these folks. His heart is for them, that they should not, Israel should not take advantage of them. But then we see Israel taking advantage of them over and over and over again. And that's why we get to Micah. That's why Assyria is going to come down. Now remember, Assyria has come down, and they have, or they will, or they are, depending on where we're at in Micah. But Assyria comes down, takes out the whole northern kingdom, right? All 10 tribes, kills a lot of them, but a lot of them spread out, right? So Assyria will take some for slaves, but mostly when Assyria comes, they kill, and whoever they don't kill, they spread out. They want them to go all around the world, right, to fan out, so that there's not one group of people together, so that Israel couldn't clump back together, build an army, and retaliate, or start a problem in a province or a country, right? So as Assyria comes and they're taking down nation after nation after nation, they're making them go. We call it exile, but they're spreading them out all over the world, in which they already know, right? Because they're coming from the north. They've already invaded the north. So as they come down, they can't go south because the desert is south and they'll die there. And so what happens? They keep going north. Well, they already own all that. They've conquered that. Those people now give allegiance to Assyria. So a few Jews go here, a few Jews go here, over here, here, and here. That's why when we get to the New Testament, right? And you have Paul, and he's sailing all over the world, right? He's going to Turkey, Spain. He's kind of hitting all these points. Well, that's because Assyria came and spread everybody out. And that's why when you get to all of these Gentile nations in Turkey, Spain, what we would call today like Europe, what happens? Paul goes, but where does he go to first? Goes to the synagogue first because Jews are there. It was because of this, right? So even though God is sending Assyria to punish them because they're not doing what they promised to God at Mount Sinai to do, and so God is punishing them, but God is also bringing an ends that they would spread across the world so that all of the world would hear about Yahweh, would hear about the God of the Jews. So when a Jewish Pharisee, one of the smartest, one of the most elite Jewish Pharisees, Saul would cruise around the world and he would go to the Jews, then he would be among the Gentiles who at least know of Yahweh, right? And so even though he's using this to conquer the world, he's also using this to evangelize the world 800 years later, right? Which is just pretty amazing. So big picture thought, right? We haven't talked much about that, but big picture thought of what's going on. So last week we looked at all the accusations and we kind of jumped all around the Bible. Tonight we're going to look at what we would call hope and restoration. So God said, you're guilty, 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 guilty. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to squash you. Judgment is coming. And it was really kind of sad and downer. Last night, there's still going to be a lot of that, but there's hope tied into it. So tonight we're going to kind of jump around and look at hope. We're going to start in chapter 2. We're going to end in the last chapter, and we'll see how much we can get in the middle, right? So chapter 2, if you have it there, we're just going to look at 2 verses in chapter 2, verse 12 and verse 13. So chapter 1 and chapter 2 is all about these accusations, how bad they are. But when you get to verse 12, the last 2 verses of chapter 3, you get a little bleak moment of hope, right? And so that's where we're going to start tonight. Micah chapter 2, verse 12 and 13, it says, I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like the sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. So God has been talking about how bad they are. He's coming. Assyria's coming. He's going to eradicate them. And then you get to verse 12, right? And it says, he says, I will surely assemble you, O Jacob, right? Which is Israel. It's not the good name for Israel, but I will surely assemble you, Jacob, and I will gather the remnant of Israel. So we've seen this before. In other prophets, we've seen this in Isaiah. We see this word a lot, right? So God is going to come and He's going to take them out, but He's going to leave a remnant. There's going to be a group, a small group, that's going to survive. So God is not going Noah's Ark on the Jews, on His people, right? He's going to save a small group. And so if you remember Noah's Ark, he wipes out the whole world, right? And he saves just a few. Very, very similar story. So he's wiping out all of the world, all of Israel and Judah, but he will leave this remnant. And I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. Now notice that it says a noisy multitude of men. There will be a remnant, but it's not just going to be 2 or 3 or 8 or 12. It's going to be a good amount of people, okay? So it says a noisy multitude of men. And we'll talk more about this as we keep reading, kind of flesh this out. So there's going to be many people. Verse 13, he who opens the breach goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, and the Lord at their head. So he who opens the breach. It's the Hebrew word paratz, and if you have a King James Version Bible, it says something completely different. It says the breaker. And so here, even though it says paratz, which means to break something, it's a title. There's a title being given here. And so when it says, he who opens the breach, he who breaks the gate open, he who goes. And so here, this is what we would say is a messianic term, right? He's talking about the king. There's going to be a king that's coming who's going to be the breaker. And this breaker, the Messiah, the one who's going to break through and allow Israel to go up before them. The Messiah is the shepherd that's going before them. He's the breaker, or we see in the New Testament, he's the trailblazer. It's often used in the New Testament. So the shepherd is going before the sheep, right? Have you heard this analogy before? Yeah, right? All the time, right? In the Old Testament, especially in Psalms, the Messiah is always referred to as the shepherd. And then when Jesus comes on the scene, he says, I am the good shepherd, right? And he calls out, I am that anointed one. I am the breaker. I am. So all this is kind of, now that we have the full Bible, we see this, but they don't see this. But a promise of God is saying, I'm going to save some, and I'm sending a king, I'm sending a person who's going to go before them, break the way, break the gate open so that Israel can go forward. Their king passes on before them, and their Lord at their hand. What's interesting about this is not only is it messianic, which is great, but also the imagery fits. If you put on your hat, right, you got to put on your thinking cap a little bit. When we walk through Isaiah together, right? So you got to know Isaiah and Micah are contemporary prophets. They're prophesying at the same time, okay? They're both prophesying in Judah. They're there, right? And it is kind of, they're just two different guys, but we're going to see God gives them the same message a lot of times, and we'll see that a little later. But while they're in Judah, right? Remember, Assyria comes down, wipes out the complete northern kingdom, wipes out all the southern kingdom, except for all the people around Jerusalem. And the Syrian army comes around all the walls of Jerusalem, right? And they got them pinned in there, and they're getting hungry, they're getting thirsty. They got them pinned in. They're like, oh man, we're going to sit here. And Assyria, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, says, well, we'll just wait them out. They'll die. And then we'll just walk right in. Who cares, right? And so they were in Jerusalem like sheep in a pen. They couldn't get out. They wanted to get out. And what happens? One night God comes and he kills all the Assyrians, and they let the gate open, and Israel walks out of the gate, right? There's a lot of people in Israel, or in Jerusalem, but for all the people who have died and been displaced and exiled, it's a small group, right? So this fits in the very near future of how the Assyrian army will take place and what's going to happen, but it will also fit a larger narrative as we continue to read. And so here in 12 and 13, we get a little glimpse of the Messiah. Now let's jump to chapter 4. Chapter 4, we're going to do the whole chapter. Whole chapter. So chapter 4, verse 1, it says, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted above the hills. What's interesting is verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 4 is the exact same verses as Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. They are each other, right? And it's not that Isaiah is quoting Micah, and it's not that Micah, I don't know, Mocha is, I don't know, his twin brother, I don't know. He works at Starbucks. And so Micah's not quoting Isaiah, and Isaiah is not quoting Micah. Okay? So remember, there are two prophets to the same place during the same time, but they're saying the exact same thing, right? So you're like, well, they're copying each other. Well, okay, they could be, but we don't see that in Hebrew. We don't see it in the English Bible. We don't see that. So what happened? God is giving the same message to two different prophets who are prophesying to the same people at the same time at the same place, right? Which would make sense. Thus says the Lord, this is what Micah says, right? thus says the Lord, this is what Isaiah says. Oh, okay, wait a minute. We're getting a message over and over and over again. Maybe we should listen to it. And so Isaiah says it at the very beginning. Micah says it here at chapter 4. And so these first couple verses are synonymous. So Isaiah, this. If you still had your notes from Isaiah, you could go back, and it's the same notes I gave you in Isaiah. But I bet you don't, so we're gonna explain what this means, right? So, it shall come pass in the latter days, right? So latter days, we would think when? End times, right? Yeah. So millennial kingdom, right? So at the end times, right? So some of this, once again, prophecy is sometimes up close, sometimes in the middle, sometimes far away. A lot of this will be all three, right? But in the latter days, in the end times, at the very end of time, what's going to happen? That the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of all mountains. The mountain of the house of the Lord. This is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is on a mountain, okay? But it's not a very big mountain. It's not what you think, okay? We would call it a hill at best, right? It's kind of plateau. It's not like the hills of North Carolina. It's not nearly that high. It's just everything else below it is really flat and just kind of goes off pretty quick. But here, he's saying that the mountain of the house of the Lord, Jerusalem, and it's not that it's a great mountain, it's the biggest mountain in Israel, because it definitely is not. They have real mountains. But what it's talking about is that it's going to be the head or the chief of mountains, because this word Rashi is here, and it's talking about that Jerusalem's going to be important, okay? He's going to be the chief mountain. It's not by height or altitude, it's by importance, right? So in the latter days, Jerusalem shall be established as the highest of the mountains. One day, a day to come, right, Jerusalem is going to be a mighty, mighty place, right? A place that all of the world will go to, right? When Jesus comes back, he's not coming back to America, y'all. He's not. You're going to have to get on a boat or a plane and go see him in Jerusalem. So he's in Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted above the hills, and peoples shall flow to it. Notice that. The world, peoples, all people will flow to Jerusalem. When Jesus returns, he will set up his throne in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and that's where the world will be. Not only just the people who love Jesus, because we know that will also be the place of the Antichrist will be there prior to that. So the whole world will draw to Jerusalem during this time, right? Those who are pro and those who are against God. And so many nations shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us ways, that we may walk in his paths. Come, let us go." Even Gentile nations, everybody will be eager to head to Israel in the end times, right? Not today. There's not a lot of people eager to go. Maybe me and Erlene. That is probably it, little note if you didn't watch the news, right? So Netanyahu, they had a speech yesterday, and he basically said, okay, right, because it's America, and he's talking about what Biden said and Kamala said yesterday, kind of saying, hey, they're not doing very good, and Netanyahu basically came out and said, hold on, hell's coming to earth. That's literally what he said. They're getting ready. They're going to war. Anyway, something to pray about. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, right? The law, not the Old Testament law, but God's direction, God's instructions. Out of this, God will be there in the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Verse 3, he shall judge between many peoples and shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up a sword against another nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. All right? Once again, when we hear these verses, we always quote Isaiah chapter 2, but it's the same verses here in Micah. But basically it says when the king comes, there's going to be some peace going on, right? So in that millennial reign, right? So in the end times, Jesus is coming back. You have 7 years of tribulation. After 7 years of tribulation, Jesus is putting his throne on the Temple Mount, and he is ruling this earth for 1,000 years as king, right? So during that king, there will be a peaceful time. That is the millennial kingdom, right? It doesn't mean everybody loves Jesus during that time. It just means that there will be peace. He will have more grace, more mercy. He will show his power, keeping all things a bid until after the 1,000 years. And then those who despise him, he will let despise him, and he will open up. We will open up the final gates. They will have Armageddon, and then they're all gone, right? So they're in the lake of the fire. So that's just, if you don't know, now you know. That's the time that we're talking about, right? So during this time, it's all peace. They will learn war no anymore. Verse 4, but they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Now, you may have heard that phrase. It's said a whole lot. If you love American history, almost every forefather quotes this verse, right? He shall sit under his own vine, his own fig tree. It's quoted even in a play that was recently done, Hamilton. They quote it 1,000,000 times in that. It's just a proverbial statement of saying prosperity, right? So you get to sit under your vine, you can sit under your fig tree. You've worked hard, but now you can sit in the shade and reap what you're saying, right? So when Christ is king, when there's no more work, we're enjoying the good part of life. Verse 5, for all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. Remember, the millennial kingdom, even though Jesus is on throne, is a peaceful state. Not every person will be saved in the millennial kingdom, right? So after tribulation, everybody who's left is saved, right? Except for small groups of people. Of those small groups of people, and then all the saved will come, and they will endure that 1,000 years. But those who are left, who are a part of the millennial kingdom, right? We're all saved, but as we produce and have kids, our kids are not saved just because we had them in the millennial kingdom. They too have to accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. Now you would think, I still don't understand in all my theology, if you can see Jesus on C-SPAN in Israel on the throne. Like, how do you not? Like, he's there, right? But it's the same way in the Gospels. People saw Jesus, heard Jesus, and they rejected him every single day, right? So in the millennial reign, we start all saved, but then as we have kids, they have to accept, and a lot of those will not. Scripture tells us it'll be more than the sand, right? There's going to be millions, billions of people who over 1,000 years will reject Jesus Christ, even though they can see him, hear him, just see the power, they will still reject, right? So those people in the millennial kingdom will not worship Jesus on the throne in Israel. They will worship their own gods, right? Lowercase g. They will create their own gods. They will do everything that they will do. That's why he says they will go after their own gods. But we followers of God, right? We will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. We will worship God on earth. We will worship God in the millennial kingdom, and we will continue to worship God in the new heaven and the new earth. In that day, declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away, and those whom I have afflicted. In the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off a strong nation, and the Lord will reign over them in the Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. Notice in what God does and what Jesus does while he was on the earth, right? He's a fan of the lame people, right? Doesn't mean they just have disabilities. It just means that they're not the rich. They're not the oppressive. They're not the ones that are capable in doing all of the sin that we've been reading about last week and in Amos and Hosea. But the kind of the elites, right, were oppressing the poor. And so God is saying here, my remnant will be the lame, right? We hear Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, right? The last shall be first, right? The lame will be first, and the first will be last, right? You must deny yourself and follow him. It's those who deny themselves are the lame. We're the lame of the world, right? Christians are the lame of the world in the eyes of the world, but luckily not in the eyes of God. So that's what it is referring to, the lame. And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come, and former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Tower of the flock. In Hebrew, it is known as the Tower of Eder, E-D-E-R. You will find that all the way back in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 35. The Tower of Eder, this is just basically saying that Jerusalem will be a military post, if you will, to protect the straying flock. So even though in this millennial kingdom there will be a lot that are saved, there will be more that are unsaved by the end of it, right? It starts off all saved, and it will eventually go to where it is more not saved. But during this time, you will be protected in Jerusalem. You'll be protected around Jesus, right? This is a time of peace. And so that's what it means when it says a tower of the flock, a military of the sheep, a watch post of the sheep, if you will. And you shall come to it, a promise from God that Israel will come to him. So he's not going to wipe them out. He will save them. In verse 9, let me say this before we get to verse 9. All right, so you everything that we just said, now verse 9 is a bunch of little bitty questions, and you read it and you're like, what? Micah is asking a bunch of little short rhetorical questions of saying, basically, Israel, how could you let it get this bad? Right? That's what he's saying. Like, okay, like you guys didn't see this, you didn't hear this, you didn't see God, you didn't hear Isaiah, you didn't hear this, and you didn't hear this, and you didn't hear this. How could you let it get this bad? So that's why he's asking in verse 9. He says, now, why do you cry aloud? Right? Oh, it's so bad. Well, duh, it's your fault. Is there no king in you? Is there nobody to help you? Is there nobody to lead astray? Has your counselor perished, that pain seized you like a woman in labor? Oh, you have no leader to help you because you cried out to man when bad things are happening, and you never cried out to God, right? Man leave you. Verse 10, writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country, and you shall go to Babylon. So here we get some near, kind of, at the bottom of your bifocals, right? Some near prophecy. Here he says, hey, writhe and groan, it's going to be bad, Assyria's coming. He says you're going to go to open country, you're going to be exiled, you're going to be kicked out of here, and you're going to have to go north, is where a lot of them go. And so you're going to have to go to this open country, this place that is not the promised land. But then he adds on a little punch. You shall go to Babylon. Now, if you look in your little handy-dandy card, right? Assyria comes in what year? 722, right? And Babylon is when? It's down there at the bottom, right there. 586, right? These are two big dates. You got to memorize them, right? So here, Assyria's coming. They're coming. They have come, right? Depending on, but they're about to come in this part of it. And he says, hey, Assyria's coming, and you're going to be exiled in 722. But then he says, but you're going to end up in Babylon in 586, right? And they were there for how long were they in Babylon? 70 years. Very good. 70 years. Jeremiah says 70. And so they were there. So they were there all the way to 516-ish, right? Depending on when they actually left, but here nor there, right? So say 516-ish, right? So here it's a prophecy saying, hey, you're going to get exiled, because they are, right? But then it also says, but that's not the worst part, right? I mean, Assyria is bad, and you're going to be exiled, and a lot of you are going to die, but that's not the end event, right? You're going to end up in Babylon. There's going to be another wave of punishment, of judgment. And so here we have a prophecy of weeks and months, maybe a year or two, that Assyria is coming, but then you also have a prophecy of about 120 years, right, that Babylon is coming. And so you just kind of have some of that kind of near, far prophecy going on. So you shall go to Babylon, and there you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies, right? So how was, a little test for y'all, right? That's like a little test. How was Israel rescued from Babylon? It's a country. Persia. Very good. Hey, you got Sunday school answers, right? I love it. So Persia, right? So Babylon was there. Those of you who went and watched the Daniel movie, right? We saw this just like literally just a few days ago. So they're in Babylon. They're there for 70 years. And then all of a sudden, God uses Persia or the Medes or Persia, Syria, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of all the same. They come in and they wipe out the Babylonians. They set up a new king. And we have Darius that comes in and says, hey, you can go home, right? So then the Israelites who want to go home, which is not very many, they can start coming back to Israel. And they come back in waves. Some come with Ezra, then some come with Nehemiah. And then after everything's rebuilt, then you have some losers who come because all the work's done. And they're like, yeah, why not, right? Nobody wanted to leave Babylon because they lived there. They grew up, they had kids there, right? They are Babylonian Jews, if you will, and they liked it. They didn't want to go back to a battlefield and work and rebuild and nothing was there. There was no drive-thrus, no Chick-fil-A's, no Starbucks. The kids didn't want to go, right? So they stayed in Babylon. So only a few of them, about 50,000, went, right? So we get some prophecy that is to come. They're going to Babylon, and there you'll be rescued by the hand of your enemies. Verse 11, now, right? So right now, at the present that he's talking to them, now many nations are assembled against you, saying, let her be defiled, and let our gaze be upon Zion. Many countries are against you. Assyria, as they take over the world, they pick up militaries, right? So Assyria is not just all Assyria, it's a lot of nations that they said, hey, you either come and join us to war, we'll kill you. And they said, we'll fight your war, right? So a lot of nations have joined Assyria, but under Assyrians' battle. And they want Jerusalem they want Israel to go down. Let her be defiled and our gaze upon Zion. But, verse 12, they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor. Imagine that, right? All the nations of the world are against Israel saying, oh man, we're going to wipe them out. And he says, but they don't even know the plans that God has prepared, right? They have no idea. They are like grains on a threshing floor. They're just waiting for that donkey to bring that big stone and just crush them over. They have no idea, right? We all make plans until the Lord changes them, all right? And so that's exactly what happens. He gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, right? So here, right now, he's telling Israel, hey, get ready, right? Get ready. I'm about to do something. Arise and thresh, be ready. Call to join the Lord in the harvest of judgment, O daughter of Zion, for I will make your horn iron and I will make your hooves bronze. It's a picture of saying, get ready to go to war, get ready to go to battle, get ready to do something, and I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to make you strong like an ox. That's where we get the horns, right? So imagine an ox with horns of iron, right, which are strong, which always means judgment, which means killing. And then it says hooves of bronze. Bronze. Think about what bronze means in the Bible. We've been reading through Exodus and Leviticus. Bronze is always judgment, right? The altar is bronze. The bottom of the tent posts are bronze in the tabernacle, right? You have the sinful man. You have holy God. What is between them? Bronze, right? Bronze is what purifies. It's what cleans. Judgment is coming down. The animal is killed. It is killed on bronze, and then after that, it's made clean. So here, I give you cleansing. I give you hoofs of salvation. I give you hoofs of judgment, of purification. That's kind of so he's getting Israel ready to go, and he's going to be with them. And you shall beat in pieces